Hi, so welcome to this, our last OSA Town Talk for this year. Sorry. So today we're going to talk about the creative process and how that affects your work. So it's something that I find extraordinarily interesting. Hopefully you guys do as well. So we're going to start out with having you all introduce yourself, because you can probably do a better job of it than I can. So if you wouldn't mind, just give your name, a brief summary of your background, and how long you've been doing art, your mediums, and so on.
This on? Oh, hi. The baby's mine. Hopefully she'll be, chill with this. I'm Fanny Penny. I have a big chain sculpture in that hallway over there on the right. And I started off as a fashion major, grew up in Ojai, and found ceramics about 7 years ago, I want to say. And I started off with making accessories for, like, apparel accessories, like jewelry. And now I'm trying to do sculpture. So there you go. That's it.
Hello. I'm Vera Long. My piece is over in the corner. It's the woman saluting with the dandelion crown. I grew up in Los Angeles in the Miracle Mile. And I went to preschool at my father was a physicist at USC, so I went to the community preschool in South Central, and it had a farm next to it. It was very diverse. The reason I bring it up is because they put up one of my tempera paintings of a flower vase with my name on it, and they shrink wrapped it, and it was like, so I was like, well, I've arrived. Like, it's up in the wall. It's right in the entrance. So that's where it all started. I credit the USC Child Care Center. So I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to French private school. I went to public school. I went to LA County High School for the Arts, which is a really wonderful, diverse background. I went to college in San Francisco. I kind of was a little bit J.D. Salingered out for a couple of years, and I kind of explored. I took a really great class in African American U.S. history, and I decided to go live in Africa for 6 months. And I lived with nomads, and I did art there. I've lived in Japan for 3 months. And then one of actually the formative, which changed my art career, because I did like large murals and large assemblages, and I was, one of the things that I thought was derailing my art career actually kind of made it what it is today. I became a mother. And that's what put me into figure drawing, because I'd done like large 20-foot murals and large paintings, and I was like, oh, I'll get right back to it after I have these kids. Like, give me a couple months, I'll get right back to it. And it was not quite like that. So I found life drawing, figure drawing as a way to get the art back into my life, and that was about 20 years ago. So I think I've taken it past the point of sketching, and I'm moving back into large paintings. So I primarily do pastel, live, spontaneous, kind of automatic art, and I'm getting back into painting. Yeah.
Hi, Susan Stinsmulen-Amond. My piece is this bright and shiny electric thing over here. It's basically stained glass on the wall. I also started off as a young mother. I was back to school. I was finishing up my BFA at the University of Texas at Austin, and waitressing and mothering. And then a friend of mine, an engineer, said he was starting a stained glass studio, and could I work part-time for him doing design work. And as soon as I started cutting the glass, I became I thought it was a miracle, for one. I've never been around anything like that. And so I pretty much self-taught in glass, but from 1973, I became a partner in the business, and then pretty much did design work all the time for trying to please people and make things work and make money. And we had a bunch of people that worked for us, and it became like an artisan studio where people could come work for us, but use the studio nights and weekends to make their own artwork. So we developed a real community in Austin around glass. So I'm self-taught in glass pretty much, but then doing all this work that was trying to please others, I rebelled and said, how can I make this medium art? And so my background in painting and drawing was where I went, and I started with the X series, and this is the first X series, one of the first, and I can talk about that more later, but it was trying to X out old ways of looking at glass, and that's pretty much sums up my whole art career, really, is rebelling against something that seems predictable.
Hi, I'm Martha Moran, and my business is Ojai Rockstacker. I do a lot of rock stacks, fountains, shower installations, primarily working in stone. My piece is back here, the glass mixed media piece, which was a big departure from what I normally do. I started out, I thought of myself as a watercolorist and a painter, and then I went to Catholic school. Was in public school, and I went to Catholic school, high school, and my hair turned gray immediately. My piece has a lot about that. But it was sort of a gift because Sister Gerardia, who's very featured in there, I tested out to get out to College of Creative Studies at UCSB at 17, and that was, it saved my life. And I was doing bronze casting and painting, and I didn't really see myself as a teacher, and I really didn't see myself doing the gallery scene. And I'd taken a film class I loved, so I went to UCLA Film School and made my living as a director, writer, story editor, and it was really fun. I enjoyed it, and of course, it was a lot easier way to make money than being an artist. And but you know, they get rid of people very quickly. You're old at 40, so. I always knew I was going to come back to art. I never knew that I would come back to stone, which I was not interested in at all because I didn't like that you couldn't. I loved wax. I loved that you could. It was so manipulative, and clay was okay, but wax was the best. And so somehow I came to rock stacking because. I moved up here because I love to walk, and I'd see these rock stacks, and people go, oh, they're wonderful. It's like, well, yeah, the stone's kind of okay. And I thought, why not try to do something that's a little different, that's more, why not use some precious stones? Why not use inlay with geodes? Why not work with stones you never see in sculptures or fountains? So that's where I am now, and this piece was interesting, became very personal, but I'm actually working with styrofoam right now. But I have to say, I feel really blessed because I liked my career in the film industry. It was fun and creative, and I liked the people I was working with. But what I'm doing right now is way, way, way more fun.
Hi, I'm Ted Gall. I started my career in the Midwest. I lived in Chicago. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago and the American Academy of Art. My first job, I got paid $1 an hour. I delivered artwork for commercial artists. When I finished school, I got a job at an animation studio. I became an animator. I worked at that for about 5 or 6 years and then left that. Then I became a graphic designer and did that for another 5 or 6 years. And in between time, I went to the Art Institute of Chicago and picked up sculpture, and just dropped everything else and became a sculptor. At one point, when I was leaving in between them, I was approached by an industrial firm in Chicago to ask if I'd be interested in being an artist in residence. So I did that for 20 years. And the concept was that I would continue at my own studio, but I would work for them 3 days a week, and I would turn scrap and waste from their factory into items that would be given to sculptures that would be given to the president of Ford Motor Company, things like that, which worked out really well. And since I had been a graphic designer, I ended up designing all their packaging. And in free time, I ended up having 4 assistants over a period of 20 years. And these guys would help me, or women would help me, and we developed large pieces that were put in parks around the city in Chicago. And some were 8,000, 9,000 pounds, 15 feet tall or 30 feet long. It was really a nice experience, and it was an experience at another man's wallet, you know, so I didn't have to worry about that. And then I came out to Ojai, and before that everything was welded steel, Corten steel, life-size figures, things like that. And I came out here and I switched over to a foundry and learned how to work in wax and to go into multiples and creating bronzes and stainless steel. And the largest that I've done while I've been out here was human figures that are 13 feet tall by 18 feet long, riding wheels for a museum in Birmingham, Alabama. And when you put it together, it's 45 feet long and each figure was comprised of 28 different pieces that had to be welded together. So I learned a lot about casting doing that, and now I'm here.
So, Ted, can you tell us about your piece for the show?
The piece for the show was, I'm always doing narrative pieces, and I'm trying to work with identities all the time. So that the piece that you're seeing is where am I now, who am I now? It has a lot of facial changes that could be put on the outside, and they're metaphors for kindness, loving and caring, and things like that. They're psychological, and they're actually hands-on, so you can touch them and play with them, open them up, and reassemble it and take it apart again. Do you want to know the process?
Well, the process, and then also how you came up with the idea for that.
Well, the idea is a series that I've been working on for a while, so I did some adaptive things that made it work for this show. Okay. So. The process is lost wax, cast bronze. Now, it's rather involved, but if you think that you're going to do a casting of your hand, so I would carve it in wax, then it would be dipped into ceramic shell. When it dried, the shell goes into the furnace and it's fired up to about 2,000 degrees, and all the wax melts out. So now you got a hole inside of this cast that you can pour molten metal into. So you pour the metal into it. When it cools, then you break the shell. So that's the lost wax concept. So it's only one pull. You don't get 100 pulls out of it. It's one at a time. And once it's broken and cleaned, then reassembled in patina. And all the patinas are done with acids. So you heat the bronze up to the point of about 3,000 degrees and then start applying acid. And I've learned that I try to treat it like a watercolor. So I don't try to make one constant color. I try to get more emotional things going on with using different colors and things like that, yet not colors that are real splashy. So.
And oftentimes you need to take weld the parts together too, right?
Well, in the case, in most of the pieces that I do that I have at the studio, you don't see here, they're all assembled also. So it's either they're hinged and made by hinged, or they are welded back together. I was mentioning the figures for the museum, where each one of them was 28 different pieces that had to be welded, because they can't cast 13 feet by 18 feet. And I mean, that was a big project. The big project was finding out how it was going to get to Birmingham, Alabama, without breaking any overhead passes, and through a lot of help from local people around here, it was amazing. Everybody pitched in and came up with great ideas. So the man that took it across country photographed it going across country too, and he stopped in Texas so my grandchildren could climb on it, things like that. And he took pictures of people's expressions on the way there. And since there were 4 naked men, he gave me the responses that he got going across country too.
So he drove across country naked with the sculpture?
Yeah, well, I had a flash it along
Those were his instructions.
Were they laying down? Was it like on a flat?
No, we had everything. I had everything designed so that they would stand up. But I wrapped them with an industrial saran wrap so that they wouldn't get bugs on them, or get blemishes on the way. But so you still had 3 naked men who were 13 feet tall riding to Birmingham, Alabama.
Statues of male liberty. The statues of male liberty.
Yes, right.
It's a wonderful piece. I would encourage everybody to look it up.
Yes, yeah, but I've been doing that for years. You know, when you're young and you have no money, and you want to be a sculptor, you go around and you beg for stuff. And I would go into old factories and try to find sheet metal and things. And I went into one factory, and the man had just changed all his steel wheels to rubber wheels. So he gave me barrels of wheels, and you know, I developed this concept of this wonderful person that would fly along on wheels and watch out over people. And so I've made a number of them, but these were the largest that I had ever done.
So how did you achieve the difference? So you use acid to,
Pardon me?
you use acid to vary the color on the cast bronze. How do you vary the color of the end result? Because there's different greens and
Well, different chemicals will develop a different color. So cupric nitrate would turn something blue-green, ferric makes it brown. There's one called pastel that'll make it white, and then you can come back and start. I found that you can almost do watercolors on them if you really play with it properly.
At 3,000 degrees?
Well, at 2,000,
Yeah, you're hot.
I mean, it's a propane torch you're heating, and you're spraying it and taking and brushing it on in layers, and you know, if you're careful. That's how I found it.
The temperature affects the color and the heat.
Well, the big problem is your eraser. If you make a mistake, you've got to start all over again, and you've got to put it in a bead blaster and bead blast everything that was on it off and start over. It's not bad when it's cool out, but when it's hot, it's more of an issue.
it's
Susan.
fascinating things. Thanks.
Susan, can you speak to your piece? You said that was the X series, and you older piece than I think it, or?
Yes, it's from, so my idea about origins was going straight back. And I work in the studio as an artist making work that's for myself, but I also do commissions, and I've had a number of actually stained glass commissions in the last few years. So it makes it difficult to throw myself into the making of art when I'm doing something that is directly designed and needs to be made. So I decided to go, this piece has been in our bedroom forever and it has not been seen, and I love it, and it sort of represents a time when I felt like I became an artist. I was doing something that was original, and it kind of put me on the map at that time with this whole X series that I did. Everything was X's. And so I thought that it suited the idea of origin because it was a potent time in my life when I felt like I developed my own voice at that time. And I mean, I evolved out of it. I still do glass on the wall, which is not so typical. Most people think of it as sculpture or windows but it's only been in the last 20 or so years that people are putting glass on the wall in various ways. So this was, I was doing the stained glass, so this still has that stained glass armature because that's what I knew. It's not a rectangle, so it doesn't reference architecture. That's another thing I wanted to get away from was the rectangular format. And it's called Excited X, capital X, CITED. And it basically is just plain mirror glass that I sandblasted the back of it and then spray painted it with different colors that evolved. And then there are jewels that I found. I was an artist in residence at RISD, and Providence, Rhode Island is the jewelry finding capital of the world, or it was. And in fact, the school got founded on money by women who owned jewelry finding industry, really. So I went shopping, and they just had, jewels and charms from the 1800s to, so it was just drawers stacked up on the wall of story after story. And so I just went crazy because also that glass, stained glass there was a big craft versus art thing that was I don't know if it's dead yet. I don't think so, actually, but
It's still a debate.
it's still a debate.
I was gonna
Bring that.
I started out with that
Yeah.
and actually pulled it out of this talk during now.
Yeah. Well, so I just thought if it's, I would make it as crafty as possible and do, I would buy things from dime stores and glue them onto the glass, and go to craft stores and anything that was crafty, and usually that women did to decorate or be creative in their homes. I used that on the piece to reference, the truly crafty, handicrafty, but trying to put it in an artistic, format of thinking about contemporary ideas about painting, but here it was, the lowly stained glass on the wall. So these were all going on in my head at the time, and that contradiction is, I thrive on that, actually, so.
So your piece is a massive departure from what you've been doing that I've seen over the last.
Yeah, I've never done anything like that before. And I always wanted to do a cast of my face, and I've never done a cast. I thought, we're going to get claustrophobic? No. With Steve Edwards and Pat Edwards doing it, they're really masters of casting. Anyway, mine really, you were talking about process. I think a lot of process is accidents and things that don't go right, and then therefore you have to adapt. And can you hold that? Just keep dropping it. So this is, I never do maquettes. I always do a little drawing. You can pass this silly thing around. If it gets lost, it doesn't matter. It's got my Pay Nationwide mortgage at the bottom. I paid off my mortgage. Anyway, this is what that was the first little drawing that I had. And it's very different from that. It's sort of like that, but it's different. I wanted to use, I love slag glass, and I wanted to use slag glass as the base. And my initial concept was, when my mom died, we found this letter that she never told us about, that her family went back to the ship that Father Sarah came on to Mexico, and that she'd owned my great-great-grandmother had owned 40 acres in downtown LA, and they're all in Olvera Street in the church. They're all in the records there. And we had silver that my mom had that was from the Reyes Adobe, and the Reyes Adobe down in Gurr Hills wanted us to give it to them. And we went, no, it's ours. And so we were related to the Reyeses and all this stuff that we never knew about our family. So I thought I was going to do a very traditional thing about origins. Then last year, I've been very smug about my family because we have really huge longevity, and grandparents and everybody lives a long time. So last year, I have a very small family. I have 2 sisters. None of us had children. And the first one got multiple myeloma and had to do a stem cell transplant last fall. And then my other sister needed emergency hysterectomy in the spring. And then her husband, who I love dearly, had to have a stent put in his brain. All at UCLA, everybody's doing great, but it was shocking to me to just keep having my little tiny family be falling apart. So my piece became, that's what's happening, we're just going on. And Steve Edwards, who's having health issues right now, he and I both were right on the same page, and he's got a beautiful piece out by Ted's. That's, both of us were thinking about mortality. We were really thinking about what's ahead, and that's why the hand. But what happened was I got to work in wax again, and I made these 3 little people, and I did it twice, and we couldn't cast it right. They were really tiny, and they were adorable. I wear a hat all the time, except for today. I had a little hat on, and my oldest sister's very, very Catholic, and she had her hands in prayer position. I mean, I love these little figures, and I have pictures of that as a wax model. I thought it was adorable, but we just couldn't get it. And so Carol Shaw Sutton came over and she said, well, you could do feathers. And it's like, well, yeah, that's you, Carol. I'm not going to, your feathers, I'll do something else. So I did flowers. They're perishable and they're gone. I want to do dandelions because they're the most, so I keep refreshing my flowers over there. So anyway, so it became a very different piece and a very personal piece, and it made me think about, and then I was going to use that plastic stuff that you recommended to Patricia, that Patricia Kubler did this wonderful Art of the Egg, and her pineapple had these amazing leaves, and Douglas had introduced her to this. What's that stuff called?
Well, it's styrene.
Styrene. Anyway, I have a ton of it that I want to play with, but I was going to do these things off the back, and they were going to have something written. It was going to be a more written piece, and then it seemed like when the brain went in on that, and it had all these, it just seemed like, whoa, I've got way too much stuff going on here. So the process became, okay, I'm putting this together, and then Steve told me, you can't use slag glass, it might explode, and you might kill children in the museum. And I have a lot of slag glass around, I've never had it explode, but I thought, well, okay, I'm not going to do that. So it meant I had to keep adapting, and I came right down to the wire, and I was about 3 days late to get my piece in, but I got it in. Anyway, but the hair is letters from, I just pulled out boxes from diaries and things from my past, and they're letters from friends, a lady I lived with when I went to art college in Edinburgh, and friends from Italy who were writing to me, so it's really old paper, and then just pictures from my past. So it turned into a completely different piece, but it was because things didn't work out the first way, and that's what happened.
Those are oftentimes the best things, those wonderful little mistakes, like you say, or accidents, miracles.
Yeah, because it turned out I had no idea what I thought of it. I mean, I was finishing it, the day before I turned it in. So turned it in, yeah. Turned it in, and got a grade on it.
So speaking of deadlines, tell us about the way you work, because what I've seen is fast and loose, and I know totally different than me.
Yeah, actually what Martha said resonated with me too, because I found this experience really surprising because, as I've said, I do drawing from life, live human beings, models, women, and I'm very interested in doing art about women, not so much that I'm drawing nude women, but just that receptivity, like through the process of doing like observational drawing, I've found this like two-way street where it's like things are happening, and I think automatic drawing is a good way to describe it, because automatic drawing, it's coming from myself, like something's coming, but it totally eschews the clunky, like rational, this is who I am, this is what I'm gonna do, so it's not pre-planned. I show up, I don't wanna know anything, like I don't wanna know too much about who I'm going to draw, and things happen, and I've brought in like color and ink and line, and it's just like, it's like being in an Italian sports car. It's like, vroom, like I just feel, it's happening, and that receptivity is really important to me. And so doing the themes last year for the museum, the fire show was like I don't often work from themes, so that was a very moving, piece about the society, and I'd also been through a landslide, and so it was like this and the funny thing is, my art is drawing people, nude people, they're exposed, and I feel very confident about it. I'm not really, vulnerable about my art. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to show up and do it. I can do it hanging from my toes. Like, we'll see what happens, and it has nothing to do with the mental chatter in my brain. That's always still there, but it just goes into the passenger seat, and I hear it going, and it's like, what is going on in my mind has nothing to do with what comes out. But so to have a theme, and have a theme that's important and attracts me, and I'm like, I want to honor it, that was a different experience. And so doing origins, everybody's like, well, what are you going to do? Well, of course you do women, and like that is everybody's origin. So originally I was thinking, I'm going to do the beautiful pelvic cradle, and thinking about femininity, I was like, yeah, it's going to be like super vivid and like this rainbow, like goddess woman with powerful and multiple legs and a big afro, and I was like, that's what's going to happen. But as I did it, because I was thinking about it, And it wasn't just going to happen. I was allowing that rational part of the thinking. I'm like, okay, you can kind of get into the driver's seat. We'll co-pilot now. And also bringing in the personal story of it. So bringing in, like, actually thinking, you know, allowing, preconceiving what I was going to do, and I had to find a way to interact with that, you know, because I don't want to know about preconceptions. So it kind of happened in like a syncopating rhythm, because it was a painting. I would do something, and usually I would just dive in and like let things happen, but I would do something and kind of let it be with it, you know, and notice it. And so that process, along with the fact that I was bringing in my personal story, because I think I'm kind of affected by the esoteric art and the spiritual art of the 20s. Like in Germany, there's the Kunst, and there's like the spiritual art, and it has this like nice subtlety to it that, like, you know, it's kind of esoteric symbolism. I love mythology. And also some people have said, oh, you should have been born in the 20s. Like, I would have totally gotten along with Beatrice Wood. Like, I get to meet her, but I kind of was born in the 20s in a way, because my namesake Vera is my mother's father, Vera Torno. And he was born in Latvia. She was from Vladivostok, and she passed away when he was about 5 years old during the Russian invasion. And I've been lately, in the past year, I've been very interested in the grandmothers, like, because my art, reapproaching my femininity has been this big, long, because when I was in art school, I was like, I had a shaved head, and I was like, you know, just, I felt like I was really like, cutting edge, you know, that mushy stuff, you know, I was like, you know, and I didn't have a lot of female role models, so I like Sartre and Nietzsche, and I'm like, oh, you know, none of that mushy stuff, not young. But looking back, I've reconnected with people that I went to art school with, and they remember how I would always like encourage them. I'm like, oh, don't worry, you've got this. And I had this like very nurturing aspect. So in a sense, that was my femininity. So as I was looking at this piece and going into not just the idea of woman, but my grandmother, my Vera, that I am named after, you know, and her death really was really foundational in a lot of my life. You know, I won't go too long because I don't want to have to pay you guys for psychology time, but but my father, losing her, she's, you know, in a way, she's very present in my life, because she was this beautiful spirit. And my grandfather, Leo, there was like a family saying, she was the flower and I'm the weed. Like, she perished and I survived. So going back and thinking about that linearness, I was going to do this big, powerful, and I do feel her strength, but going back, I realized, this is why I say it was, not only is it a reversal in that I was thinking about what I was doing, in general with my art, I take something that would be thought of as a vulnerable situation. I'm drawing a nude woman, like, standing in front of you, and I find the strength. I'm like, oh no, you've got this, and you've got that, and I feel your brain, and it's like I'm finding the strength in what's vulnerable. This, I ended up finding what's vulnerable in what I see as strong, because I was looking and I thinking back about, you know, how she passed away, and these like long, and I don't know her, but she's in me. You know, and that's kind of your origin. And I realized, like, you know, we all come from somebody falling in love. And even if it's become a grand story, it was just a little thing that created that, like little details. And as I was doing it, like, it is actually from life. It was a self-portrait. I was like drawing myself in a mirror, and just like a little gesture of me like touching. And I just did it, and I just let it be. It was like this syncopating thing where I just do a gesture and let it be. And then you talked about dandelions. Like, I just saw stars above the head, so it's kind of like dandelions and fish, but it was just these little subtle things that I was like, you know, I would do them and like let them be. So.
The magic of knowing when to stop, right?
I guess.
And with that, I'm going to have Fanny, and I'll hold the mic.
Oh, okay.
Yours.
Well, I can manage, I think. Can you repeat the question?
Tell us about your piece.
I was absent for a minute.
Your piece with in the show, and how the concept, and then how you implemented it.
Implementing meaning the process.
Process.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm kind of new to this idea of, or this concept that I'm working with. It all comes from this one. It's funny, when I was pregnant with our first daughter, I had this same like burst of creativity and energy. Want to see? She'll go with me for a second. Yeah. She might want a little dose of beer. No? Anyway. So it's literally a chain, right? Oh my gosh. And it's so funny. She was so okay with everybody else. Okay, so I'll make it quick. Each of my chains is sort of representative of forming, working through, and then completing like a thought or a feeling on something. So I try to use the process as a means to kind of distill how I feel about something or my thoughts on something. So, and they're kind of personal. You know, I should get better about sharing what they're about. I'm working on that. But this one in particular, the reason it's in this show is because it sort of is the origin of this series. It's the first one that I made successfully, where it came out of the kiln and I thought, I like this. So it's sort of like the taproot for the whole series. But essentially, each link, I put I work through some thoughts as I'm building it. And I try to bring my attention back to whatever I'm sort of meditating on as I'm working with each link. And in a sense, it's like a meditation. You know, you pay attention to your breath, and then when you feel yourself drifting off, oh shit, I forgot to pay this bill. You kind of like, oh wait, hold on, I'm gonna come back to my breath. I'm gonna like sit here for another half an hour and really do this. It's sort of a similar concept. I am not disciplined.
Do you use sketches? Is it pre-thought out, or do you
Oh,
just
yeah.
let the clay tell you where to go?
No, I feel like maybe we're on the same level with this. Plans are important. I'm not as free flow as you, by any means. So there's been a few sleepless nights in figuring out like the math, like how do I do this? And I do that with everything I make. I spend a lot of time figuring out the logistics before I make something. And there's a lot of sketching and a lot of math. I mean, I'm a fashion major. I went to fashion school, so I learned how to make patterns. And so everything that I make a pattern first. I don't just free form, cut things out and hope they all look nice together. I use Illustrator and I make a shape, and then I cut it out and I use it to cut my chain links. And usually somebody's asleep on my back while I do it. Like she was all day today. But, okay, so that brings us to the process. Okay, in an ideal world, I stain all of my own clay, which I love doing. So essentially, I take a clay body that I really like and I make it into any color I want. And I do that whole process. And then once I have work or clay that's ready to go, I make patterns from sketches. Oh, Mama! Oh, no! And then I cut and dry my chain links, but in a very methodical way, in the sense that like I can't just put them all together when they're wet. So, for example, I have to be really organized and keep really tight notes and have like alerts on my phone to remind me to do my scoring and slipping and my assembly at certain times, etc. So, yeah, that's about it. I think that's about all I can do. But I think the main thing is it's all brand new, right? It's just brand new. I've only been making these chains as long as I've been pregnant with her.
Wow.
So it's really fresh, and I'm so excited about diving further into it. And now I'm gonna walk around.
Fanny also makes jewelry, so I would encourage you on the tour to stop by and see her stuff. She makes some just lovely ceramic-based jewelry.
I really think of those chains as sculpture. I
Yeah.
mean, they're so strong, and then just the idea of chain has so many contexts.
It does, and it's a functional, I mean, chains are supposed to be functional, but, you know, in some ways I'm creating this, like, actually, it was Penny that mentioned this, but it's like this thing that's, this beautiful object that normally we perceive as a functional thing, that's, it's sort of, it's no longer that, it's elevated to something else, or not elevated, just shifted.
You can chain up the Titanic. Well, I love the scale too,
But
just
those
the size
nautical
of it.
chains were like the main inspiration. I was watching The Terror.
Nautical?
Has anybody seen The Terror? It's a fantastic short series. I think it was AMC or something. And there's all these amazing nautical chains that are just huge. And I would like rewind and pause them and just catch my ideas.
Oh, wow.
It was worth watching the series because it's really entertaining, but also there's great costumes and cool objects and stuff.
Also, while you're in family mode, you know, the idea of the links between, you know, the members of your family, you know, you have babies, husband, the links that hold us together.
And the community,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
So I'd like to just have a discussion now instead of the round robin. And one of the things I thought might be interesting is to explore how the process of making affects what you do or affects your art as a whole. So in that aspect, do you think about the limitations of your medium while you're working or in planning a piece, or is it just, you know, unconscious, you just go for it and you just know from having done it so much that those limitations are there, because they're certainly there. I mean, you know, Tad, as you mentioned, with lost wax and casting, there's physical limitations with stone, you know, with glass, not so much with you other than canvases. Well, you don't even use canvas, you use paper, right? So, but still limitations.
I still want to break the
pigment
rules.
and-
Like, I like
yeah.
to use it in ways that it hasn't been used.
So, all of us are working with essentially mediums and tools that have certain limits. And do you think about that? Does it affect your work? Did you enter the conversation?
I just want to follow up with Fanny that I also, working with glass, I have to do patterns and layouts and figure out how I'm going to cut the glass and what goes on, what's painted on the back and what's painted on the front. I do a lot of sketches and have transparent paper with drawings on them that are layered. And I also, in Photoshop, will scan my sketches and put them in Photoshop and then change relationships there to then make the patterns. Because even when I paint on glass and fire it in the kiln, which is a 12th century technique, basically I'm tracing myself. I'm tracing the designs and the ideas that I have onto the glass on a light table and then firing it in the kiln. And then it's a real process. So it not very often is it spontaneous. When I think like of Vera, I think like you're almost a performance artist from the, you know, with the work you do. And I know that there's people that are more spontaneous with glass, but it comes with, you know, the tradition of the material comes with a lot of, like stained glass is all about these drawings, and then the drawings become the glass. I mean, I don't like it to be so that it's so planned out, unless it's for a commission, that it's so planned out that I can't make changes on the way. With a commission, I pretty much stick to what I've promised them. So that also is a mixed brain, you know, activity of being really strict with myself and then trying to break rules.
But it looks spontaneous the way you do it. And the thing I love about glass, it's like, because I love color, it's like, I always say pastel is the most pure pigment you can get to, but I think glass supersedes it because the light going through it, it's just like you're in the rainbow, and it's
Oh,
like,
you should do glass. You have so much color and subtlety and then color with the.
I did do
material.
glass for a while. The one hard problem was that I couldn't use gloves, and so I'm just like breaking through my hands with glass and lead, and I'm like,
You were injuring yourself?
No, I just was like, I shouldn't be doing this because I was, the glass everywhere and the lead, and I was like, but it's the tactile. Like I appreciate, all the digital arts and abstract and, and I love that, but it's such a different part of my brain to be removed. Like, because when I'm doing the work, like I don't see what I'm doing. I have no idea how that happens, but then like only when I take a picture of it, then I'm like removed, and then I see that was at work. But I don't know that it's because basically cave painting, you know what I mean? It's materials.
We should collaborate on something.
I tend to be quite the opposite. I think that, I don't know how you feel, but I feel like, the rocks are heavy, and so then lifting them, each one of them, you have to deal with that, and there's all that, which is just so boring. But I do want it to be creative, and I do want to not know as much as possible. I want it to be more like you, that it's something that just kind of comes together, and I think it's been very hard on my back, but that's the way I work. And the reason I was talking about styrofoam, I've been doing these pieces. I really like to work really large, but it's too hard with rock. So I took this styrofoam class where, you put a concrete slurry over it. So you sculpt in concrete, and then you do certain things, and then it looks like concrete. And then you can sand it and do surfaces. And, I'm just beginning to do it on a large scale. And oh my God, it's so nice to be working with something that this whale I'm doing. Tanya Kovaleski and I are doing a show at the Malou Foundation. It's a year-long show next year, and I want to do 12 altars for it. So I've got 2 already done, but I'm doing this one about the ocean, and it's a whale in a lot of plastics and stuff, and plastic bottles and debris and stuff. So, I have had this idea in my head for a couple of years, but finally I'm getting this whale, and it's big, and it's really light, and then you can just keep adding the styrofoam. When you screw up, you just, you do the toothpick and shish kebab sticks. It's not like wax and bronze. It's like, it's so forgiving. It's just the cleaning up is horrible. That's the horrible part.
Well, unfortunately, I don't know which one. I have fun doing commissions, depending upon the size of them. On small things, you can be fun, and you can be very light with them. It can actually, but larger things, you're just stuck with labor-intense stuff. So you've got to do a lot of planning ahead of time, so you don't run into problems. So I enjoy smaller commissions, and then I can really get into it. But the larger pieces are just heavy, and it takes more than one person to do. And yeah.
You get a crane.
Right. Or you rent a crane.
Right.
And so it becomes very cost prohibitive. So.
Actually, I have one more thing to add. Sure. I'm just thinking about what everybody's saying, and they're saying, oh, I have to plan it out. And I totally see that you have to plan it out, but all these mediums, there's that tactile connection. There's the glass, there's the rock, there's the metal. So although you have to strategize and plan it, it's at the heart, it's because you have this relationship. You know what's possible, and you're going to navigate it, but it's this very kind of wordless, tactile relationship that you have with it. So in that sense, that remains like, the spiritual spontaneous connection, and then all the planning goes around it. But at the heart of it, it's that relationship. That's all I wanted to add.
You worked with hot glass, right?
I've worked with others who have blown hot glass from drawings that I do.
But you haven't blown?
No, only really late at night when nobody's around. Really. For me, if I'm stuck, I go to paper, because I don't feel so like, I can throw a piece of paper away, or I can like fuck up and it doesn't matter to me. And so, but on the other hand, I get really uptight if I'm working on really expensive paper. I mean, I have this thing about, I mean, I can cut hand-blown glass with less trepidation than really fine paper. I don't know what that is. Maybe I'll burn
Like a
through
wedding
that.
dress. You're like, oh, this really counts.
I think having worked with glass, the offhand glass blowing is probably the most spontaneous thing with glass. You know what I mean? Because you don't have to, you can actually just do it, and it happens. That's why I love blowing.
Yeah, most of the time I see people with a plan about what they think they're going to be going for, but letting the glass drip and fall through perforated metals or from high buildings onto, throwing it in water, all that stuff. There's so much performance going on with hot glass now. You can see it online, or see it if you. There's a great new called the LA Glass School. It's down in San Pedro. That's open to people coming and learning how to blow glass. Really cool people are involved with it, and that's, huh? Yeah.
We need one here. We need a hot studio.
That's you should do it.
Yeah.
Just what I need.
I'll do the fire clearance around it.
So anybody else want to add anything about your medium and your technique, how you think it might limit you, or that you don't let it limit you?
I think you just go to another medium if that's limiting you. I mean, that's the way I feel.
Well, I guess my point was everything limits. It's just whether you acknowledge that consciously or not, or you are so used to it it doesn't even enter your mind.
Actually, limits are really important to me in process because while I'm drawing, there are no rules, but it's very disciplined how I show up. Like, even if I don't, but it's like you show up and this is how you do it, and that's very, like, kind of physical, and you're like, this is how, and there's this bravado, but, so it's that structure and that limit of just, like, showing up and being there and doing it. It doesn't, like, that's, really, that limit is super important, and then within it, then I'm like, okay, here we go. Oh, and I have another, because we're talking about collaboration, since now we're going to collaborate, and we've got you on the spot. So you're doing that styrofoam, and you're covering it in, I want to say, because he was talking about patinas, and I love pigments, I love the chemistry of materials, and this is one of my most precious possessions is this really big book on metal patination formulas. Like, you might see it in my studio, I don't know. I'm kind of like close about it, but so using metal powders on this, I've always wanted to do that, like, because I love the idea of patination. So to do like paper mache sculptures and then put metal powders on them and then experiment with patination. That would be fun.
I haven't done that yet.
I might share my magic Bible with you.
I wish that, like, I don't know, just shifting materials, like finding a new material to kind of break that planning thing and not, like, I am never spontaneous with my work, ever. The only time that I'll go there is if my daughter's in the studio with me and she's like, Mom, how do I make a snail? And then even then I'm like, well, you have to do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. And, when she was really, really little, I would let myself play and do experimenting and whatnot, but I long for that sort of, that throwing glass off of a high building and making like an art happening out of a material, that's something I'm looking for at some point. We'll see.
There you go, we should do that.
I know, right?
Have a little weekend.
What would you think, I was gonna say, what would you think about our next, now that the show's coming down, that our next year's show, that maybe we partner with another artist in our group and do something different?
Push the envelope.
With spontaneity being like one of, or,
Well, just something just outside your comfort zone.
yeah.
I find that doing things like trying to do something new, I find that there's this terror, and as I get older, that I postpone and procrastinate, and finally I just have to, okay, go out there and just do it, you know, but and then it's fine. But it's
Yeah.
funny how you get this thing of, well, I've got to do this, you know,
So-
anything to avoid doing that.
That's a perfect segue into the next discussion, which is basically just as your choice of medium and your ability to manipulate it, your skills in working with your medium, establish your boundaries. So does your experience, right? So I think it's safe to say that all of us are influenced by what we've done in the past, what's worked and what hasn't, schooling, things of that nature. And one would assume that those past experiences are beneficial to the creative process. Does it ever become a hindrance to the creative endeavor? And if so, why? Or how do you get around it?
I think that sometimes you get into a comfort zone, and that's not good for your creativity. You know, if you don't slash out and try new stuff, you're just remain dead in the water. And just sitting here listening to you guys talk about this, how easy it really would be to draw with bronze. It's not very hard. If you've got wax rods,
Right.
they flow, and you can warm it up and you can draw with them. You know, you can do images and lay them down on stone or metal, and just by manipulation of screws and gates, you can have that all cast out, clean it up, and so it would be something that you could use with urethanes. You could outline it in bronze, and it's not that heavy. You can put a 1/4-inch rods or things like that.
How thick big around is the wax?
You can go up to 1/2 inch.
So, just spitting here, but it seems to me that if you could temperature control a hot glue gun, you could draw with rod really easily.
Sure you could, yeah.
And then-
Can I ask, I'm trying to visualize what you're talking about. It sounds really, but I think I might be making up a lot of it. So you're saying that you could pour wax, and that, is it kind of like solder where the bronze will follow?
Wax come in rods. It comes in wax rods, and you go anywhere from 1/16 of an inch to a 1/2 inch thick, by 2 feet long or so, or you can order it special. But you could actually draw with it. I mean, you could just form it 3-dimensionally. You got somebody that can build a form for you real easy.
Yeah, or just heat it, just enough
Well, you heat
to
it
get
as
it
you're going along.
elastic.
You can
and
use a
then
heat gun. You can put warmers on it. You could flatten it. You could scribe it. You could texture it.
So it's the bronze itself is soft.
The
It's the
wax.
wax. Okay, so it's wax.
Come
Then
by
you're
and
gonna
wax
pour it.
for wax.
Yeah, then you pour it.
Make it a cast.
Cast it, then
The
pour it.
wax pad. So basically the wax is just the
Sacrificial.
mother material, if you will. So you make whatever it is you're going to make out of the wax, and then they make a mold of it. In the case of what Ted's talking about, they actually dip it in a slurry, which clings to it, and they keep doing that. They build up a shell.
Was it a porcelain slurry?
Basically, it's a ceramic
Ceramic shell.
shell,
Yeah.
and much stronger than porcelain because it's going to have massive thermal shock. And then they put that in the kiln, heat it up, and the wax drips out. It burns out. And then they fill it with metal. And
But then
that's,
that mold's done.
and that's called lost wax casting. It's done in the art world quite often. The majority of mechanical parts for aircraft are made that way. There's all kinds of boundary things where lost wax is still being used. And jewelry.
But it seems like we're talking sort of about spontaneity, but in a way, you're capturing that spontaneity in another material. I mean,
Spontaneity
it's not
is
the,
a pencil and a piece of paper. That's spontaneity. That's nice.
I've still found a pencil, and I prefer to draw on tracing paper because of the tooth. So I have a special pencil. I like tracing paper to roll. I still find that the best tool I have.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of tools.
I feel like I'm learning a lot from this talk, because to hear you guys say, because I see your work, there's so much spontaneity and life and play in it. Like, it just, it like lights up and I see it. And so it's interesting to see that, you know.
Well, so there's spontaneity of material and then also, and process and also of idea. I mean, yeah,
It's that dedication to the fun.
Well,
like it's a relationship
yeah.
with it.
You mentioned something about knowing when a work is good, or you
Knowing
said
when
something.
to stop.
Knowing when
The
to-
magic is knowing when to stop.
Yeah, I always have a question about what is good work, because, if I work on a series, I've worked on series that, I did some works about men. I called them man views. And none of them have sold, and I think they're really pretty cool work. But, so does that make them not good work, because the audience is not, like, biting, And then it just becomes storage, and when do I pull it back out again, or do I not? And I mean, there are artists I know of and read about. There's a show up at Hauser and Wirth right now of Philip Guston's work. I know, and he started on these series of, basically he was an abstract painter, and then he went to these figurative objects that are pretty raw and ugly and painterly, and a lot of pink as a color, and the critics hated the work. And there's all this work that's still available now, and he died in 1980 or so. And I'm just curious to, when you look at work, you just say, oh, that's good, or how do you know that's good? And, oh, look, her work sold. I think there's so many levels of how to discern.
I think you've raised a whole bunch of points that segue into process, but they're not about process, but probably worth exploring. And one is, and I speak just for me, why do you create something, right? So do you create something to sell it, or do you create something because most of the things I create because I have to do it. I don't care if it sells or not. I don't care if people like it or not. I do it for me, or for the process of doing it oftentimes because I'm trying to learn something or work something out or whatever. So I never think of the sale, ever, at any point. So it's interesting but I'm not in galleries. That's not, I'm not in galleries, I'm not in the tour.
And you're poor.
Well, yeah, I do.
They're the economics of, I know what you're saying, and that's the ideal, that you make things because you have to make them, because you're driven to make them.
But if you make something and it doesn't sell, I don't think that is necessarily an indicative comment on the piece. If anything, it's a comment on the audience, right?
I have that happen all the time, and it's actually really fascinating to me, like how I've been trying to do that a lot more lately, because it's one thing we've talked about as a group.
Do what more?
Get people to talk about your work. Instead of you talking about your work, hearing it through, it's so precious when people go for the words. You have no idea, because it's all of a sudden it's like having new eyes and seeing it anew, and it's you can't go wrong. Say whatever, you get to be an artist. Say whatever you just say it, because it's so, to see what's reacting with people. But I do have it happen all the time where I'm like, oh, this is a good piece. People are going to really, and it's crickets. And then something where I'm like, oh, am I going to share that? Yeah, share it. And be like, we love it. And I'm like, oh. That's part of the adventure, actually.
Yeah, I don't think I wasn't aiming toward talking about economics, really, or whether something sells or not. It's just those ideas that you have to do and you think are important, but they don't seem to resonate, that they just kind of disappear into the storage unit with time. And it's potent to think about, especially when you've been making work for a long time. And I think we all have that. We all have maybe those the storage units.
What you're scratching at is, what is the essence
mean, I don't want to.
I mean, I don't see a separation in it. I mean, I've taught clay, you know, I've worked in other mediums, you know, that are all considered craft, and they're not. You know, they're fine art.
Right.
So I don't get into the argument about it.
There's so much going on in the art world now that, you know, with social practice and making comments on, you know, our lives and the ambiguity and ridiculousness of our lives and the nonsense and the performance and the ephemeral quality of the materials that don't last. And it seems like it's more and more about idea and less about a finely made thing. I don't think we see that much here in Ojai of that kind of work. Maybe at the basic premise, Teddy's Gallery, but you know, it's wide open now. I think it's just there's so much creeping back and forth and intertwining of. I mean, there's sculptors that, you know, that do use every material possible, and like even in the universities, the schools, kids are studying. They're not a sculptor per se. It's just mixed materials and mixed experiences, so that they have knowledge of all of the, you know, as many as the universities are offering. And I don't know how that's really working out, but I like what I'm seeing. I mean, and I think there's a lot of potent, you know, I sometimes feel embarrassed now that I make things that still go on the wall, even though I think that the ideas I have in them are bigger than what the thing is. But I, you know, I think that in my point of view, I think that that's less like what is this, what is that, in the broader world view of what's going on in the art world. I would conjecture to say that because I'm stunned and surprised all the time. You know, by
To me, art is anything created by an entity, whether that be a single person or a collaborative effort, that tries to transmit an emotion to a group, to an audience, whether it be visual art, you know, music, whatever. So, and then craft is how you get there, right? So you can be a really good craftsperson and not be an artist. And you can be a really terrible craftsperson and be an artist. It's really, the essence is, what are you trying to do? Right? It's not, to me anyway, it's not the end result. It's what was the point, or what is the point?
Yeah, I think the thing that ties those together as well is that it's a communication. It's like some kind of communication. You're like maybe seeing what's just beyond you. Maybe you're connecting deep with like where you're coming from, but it's like a communication. And I think when you were talking about the difference between Western and other modalities, in the West, we have a very, like, there's a mind-body split, you know, and we tend to esteem, you know, what's of the mind, what's rational, you know, and kind of like, oh, the body, that's like lowly, but that's not, you know, that's just, you know, our way of looking at it. So when I think about craft, that's very tangible and physical. And so art, we're like making the communication between, you know, abstract concepts, which can be beautiful and poetic, and like embodying them in the materials. So it's like this communication of, you know, between you and the material, and then, you know, what it like connects to other people. And that's like a whole, that is it. It's a whole open road. And that's exciting. But like stories, I mean, there are stories there. How do you touch a story? You know, but you feel like emotions are, like I always say that emotions are where the spirit and the body intersect. You know, you can't take the spirit out of it, and you can't take the body out of it because you feel it, but it's connected to something. So it's like where they intersect. So in a way, I feel like art is that intersection between, you know, something you're trying to communicate, and it's like, but right here, right now, and, you know, deliver it. Yeah.
But there, I mean, just going back to what you were saying before, and because in a way, what I'm trying to do with my work right now is like build a concept and a story, because I've definitely outgrown And, you know, I started off very much just, you know, doing jewelry and making my rope. I make rope as well as part of my process of jewelry making. And I went and I did craft fair after craft fair after craft fair, and always the next one that I did was always fancier than the one I did before, and they were always more expensive than the last one I did, and I always made more money until I was just so like, I wasn't connecting to the material, and I didn't have a story with the material. It wasn't, I'm done with that.
You weren't feeling it.
I'm
it
just
wasn't-
done.
Yeah.
And so, sorry, I'm trying to bring it back to like craft versus art, but in some ways, like,
It has meaning for you now.
Yeah, I
The
mean,
ropes, the chains.
yeah, like this whole, like, yes, I work in two craft mediums. I'm a fiber artist and I'm a ceramicist. So those are craft mediums, but I'm trying to elevate it to a conceptual place for myself, not because I really care about being, you know, fancy or anything. But I don't know, just going back to what you were saying, I feel like, and I have a background in fashion, okay? But right now, everything is in style. You know, everybody's doing everything, and it's all in style, if that makes any sense. It's just as much in style to dress as a cowboy as it is to dress like a flapper girl, as it is to look like you are from the moon or have rainbows all over you. It's all in style, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways, I am not by any means in the art market. I've definitely been in the craft market for a long time, but maybe it's sort of like the fashion world right now, where everything goes. And there are a lot of bridges being built between all of the different mediums and all of the different ways that we use these different materials and mediums, et cetera. And I mean, it's really an inspiring time to be a creative person.
I think it's a little bit confusing too, because it's like trying to find meaning. It's like, like, if everything is there, like, for me right now, what makes sense is nonsense. Because I can't tie it together anymore. I can't tie what I see together anymore. I can't think in my studio with, like you say, everything being possible and okay to do.
Yeah.
So is that exciting or is that frightening?
I'm a little on the,
It's stressful. I mean,
factor in
What was
age.
that?
You reach an age where you aren't still part of that critical dialogue, that it's the younger people are bringing it up and there's a whole new style.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay,
I would,
so
I
you
don't know.
can
I
see
think-
that you're getting a varying points of view based on age.
No, I think that's
I would definitely say that is not the case.
yeah, I don't know.
I think it boils back down to which I tried to bring out, which is experience. You're self-limited, not you, sorry. we self-limit, right? And I think it has a huge amount to do with what you're used to doing and what your normal thing is.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I'm such a creature of habit that I just, instead of pushing the boundaries and thinking of something that I could make that's new and exciting and da-da-da-da, trying to use my material in any way, I just wind up going right back to what I always do, because that's how I know I can pay my rent. Or that's how I know I can engage my daughter in what I'm doing, so I can get the work done.
Sometimes I think kind of what comes at you in life, I mean, we had a house fire, and I had a lot of really good insurance money. And so we got to redo my shower, and luckily I had a contractor who just said, well, you could do anything you want there. I mean, you do work in stone, why don't you do whatever you want to do? So I carved petroglyphs and did petroglyph ribbons, and something I never thought I would do, but it took me into the world of functionality, and then it took me then to fountains, and it's like, well, fountains that are out there are so ugly, and gee, they can be really beautiful, and so why not take stuff that's functional and make it beautiful? I'm not going to say artistic, I'm just going to say beautiful, and try, or make it, for me, that is the pleasing thing for me to look at, and to walk into a shower and go, oh, it's very nice to be in here. You know, that sort of thing. It's a very pragmatic way of looking at it, but that, I mean, it's kind of like the way I think about it now. It's really trying to bring art to design, going to design then,
But
not craft.
you stepped way out of your comfort zone with your origin piece, right?
Yeah.
And did you find that stressful or exhilarating or both? Or?
The only stressful part about it was that the really fun part in doing projects is, the really fun part is the very end, when you've gotten 75%, 85% there, and you've gotten the glass finally to look decent, and you've figured out what, you know, the whole thing is. And the fun part is that last stuff you do, and I had about 5 minutes to do it. That was, but it was, I would have enjoyed lingering and playing with it, and I didn't get to. But no, it wasn't stressful. I mean, that part was, it was just stressful to make the deadline. It wasn't stressful to do it. It was like, this is fun, and
Like
I
a
don't know
surrender.
if it's going to be any good. Who cares?
Right. So
Who
so
cares?
what's
It's
your-
gonna be what it
What's your
is.
fun part
Oh man, my fun part?
of the process? What's your best part?
Oh, it's every part. But I really like, I mean, again, I'm come from a fashion background, so building color palette, building a texture palette.
And where is that in the process?
It's all the time. It's like this cool, evolving, or sorry, it's always with me, that part of the process. Because I'm also very process oriented, so if I think, oh, I'm gonna make this beautiful green, and I'm gonna dye this clay all this beautiful green, and it comes out and it's like totally not the green I had hoped for, I'm still like really into it. Because I just appreciated what got me to that point. But gosh, I think really pulling something out of the kiln and feeling like, yes, I did it, is really fun.
You know, I think one of the keys of art is that, and what's important about it and just pervasive in it, is that it's humanizing. Like, art is humanizing, and it can and that goes in different directions. It can be humanizing in the sense that I've got this abstract idea, but I've got to make it real. I've got to deliver it in the material. And it just reminds us of our limitations and our and it can also be humanizing in the sense that you've started looking at things a certain way, and this is what I am, this is what I do, this is how people are, this is what it means to be human, and then art is like, oh yeah? Like, you know, throw that aside. You're actually, you know, it like reaches beyond those limitations, but that's part of being human too, because we're kind of the freak of nature. Like, why can't we just like exist in nature and be happy? It's like, no, we got to build this, we got to do that, we got to, you know, be like, go beyond. You know, so it can like ground us in like what, you know, right here, right now, we're here, we're together, there's something happening. It can re-ground us in that, and it can also take us beyond. If that gets too static and confining and, you know, outdated, it's like, all right, here you go, off the cliff, like, you know, you're going to find the new you. So.
Ted, your favorite part of the process?
I think finishing it. Just standing back and looking at it and saying, do I really like it, or did I waste a lot of time?
Could I add one thing to what I said?
Oh,
I really like walking out to my studio and turning on my clock radio to the classical station, and then pouring myself a glass of wine. And everybody's already asleep.
7 a.m. in the morning.
No, or like 10 p.m. at night, and just having that, like even just standing there and knowing that I can make anything I want, but I'm just gonna like breathe it in and appreciate that I'm like about to do it. I really like that.
Susan?
Well, Fanny mentioned one thing, and that is like opening the kiln is pretty, like I'll be laying in bed in the morning and I'll go, oh, what have we got all this stuff to do? Oh, you got to open the kiln and see what happened. And that's pretty fun. I mean, it can be small things on the way, but yeah, I think sometimes it's really hard to know, like when you look at a piece and say, did I waste a bunch of time? But if you look at something, and if you, for me, if I've put things together, and I very often work with imagery or mark making, If I've put something together and I don't recognize it, I look at it and it looks strange to me and I can't decide in the process, and maybe, a week or several weeks will go by, late night, drinking the wine, out there looking at it. But I think that when you're putting different materials or different ideas or images together, they've not been there before. So those things have this almost like molecular time period, a time period for the molecules to like sort of get used to each other. I'm going really basic on, whether these things work together. And I've found that with time, sometimes things they then belong together. One of my favorite artists is Magritte, and he always put ideas and images that were very contrary to the normal way of thinking. I don't think of myself as a surrealist, but that kind of wonder at seeing something that you haven't seen before, or seeing something together I think that's probably one of the reasons I do it.
For me, it's the eureka moment, the figuring it out, the concept, because in my work, it's pretty much goal-driven, so there's, you're trying to achieve some statement. And I'll do a dozen different concepts, or 10 different concepts, and literally make little models, and one will just go, oh yeah, that's it. And then you have to build it big, so it's having that little piece of magic. From there on, it's just work.
Do a nice maquette.
Yeah, I love making maquettes.
Do a lot of maquettes, and that's really a lot of fun.
I love maquettes.
Yeah, see, I
I
because to me it's like, well, that's where, because I did do
I mean, once you've done the maquette, the big one's done.
Well,
No, I
once
think
you've
it's
done the
fun.
maquette, the big one's done.
Yeah, I mean, if the idea came out, it's really good.
Yeah.
10 ideas and they're wonderful.
Yeah,
Something great's gonna come out of it. Something.
yeah, we're on the same page.
We're starting the next one.
I love this problem solving.
Yeah, I also think about like looking at art in Ojai versus looking at art outside in the world, like in LA. I mean, that's one of the art centers of the world, is right down the street. And if we look at things here in our way, because we're a community and we know a lot about each other and we know the work and we have some history with seeing things, I just feel like I'm not going to say what the difference is, but it's like, yeah, looking at the work in LA in the context of the whole world, and then here in Ojai looking at it in terms of friendships and community and OSA and the galleries that we have, and it's kind of like, it's a different thing,
It's not LA, it's not Chicago, it's not New York.
Right.
It's Ohio.
Right.
You live in Ohio.
I do.
Thank goodness.
But that's all I'm
Thank you,
saying
Ojai.
is that,
Well, you
yeah.
just strive for it.
Strive.
I think there's a lot of nice stuff being done there.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's what I was trying to say. I wasn't trying to
Yeah,
say one was,
okay.
no, I was trying to say that I kind of like the way we look at each other's work here in our community and appreciate it.
Any of you have any
Yeah.
questions?
That's good.
What's a maquette?
Maquette.
A maquette's a scale model. So, in my case, I typically work pretty big sculptures, and, I'm making things that need cranes to move them, so I'll make little things first to work out all the.
Maybe you're just a design.
Yeah, and I again, just speaking in my work, nowadays the typical way to do the large-scale stuff is you 3D model on a computer. Maybe you're making a maquette on a 3D printer. I hate that because I want to touch it. So I work in wood. I have a full wood shop where I carve wood and massage it, or clay, or some other medium to make the maquette.
The tactile part of the process.
Yeah, because I can finesse it that way. I mean, I did a stained glass window for a church that was 3 stories tall. I wanted these figures in it that were ethereal. I carved them in wood, so I could draw them to do them in glass. it's just a weird,
Process.
process.
Well, one thing I wanted to jump in about, because I don't think I answered what my favorite part is. I feel like there are different parts of your brain and there are different ways to receive it. Because I totally love the actually doing it where I'm just like immersed and I'm just like that Italian sports car. I can feel like the gas going. I'm like, I'm flying now, and just, going through it and not worrying about it. But then there's also, and it's a totally different part of my brain, is the stepping back. And now at this point, I have to just take a picture of it because I'm so close to it and so big. And then I see it from afar. And then that other part of my brain comes in where I'm looking at it as if I'm in Los Angeles, from afar. What does this mean? What does this connect to? Where am I that? And then I start thinking about from the outside how it connects with everything. And that's enjoyable too, but it's two totally different relationships to it. I enjoy both, and they're kind of connected because I'm doing both of them, but it's hard to, really, there's no direct connection. There's actually doing it, and then there's stepping back.
Doing it, typically?
Well, so that's why this was different. I've been doing live drawing for 20 years, so what looks like it took weeks usually is I almost don't want to say because it seems like it diminishes it 20 minutes, maybe an hour at the most.
We're all jealous.
But it's really quick.
Literally a year to 2 years to put some out the door.
I often find at the studio tour that the things that I put together the night before sell. And it's really, and I have to say, well, you can't take it home because it's Jerry, there's plumber's putty in there and nothing, it's completely disastrous. But it's funny how that happens, where something that comes quickly and it's easy and.
Well, it's just the blocks are off because, to act, it only takes as long as it physically takes to do it because my mind, like I said, the rational part, and I have a very critical side, by the way. That's why I love teaching art because it's not about me teaching kids what to do. It's oh, that hang up? Oh, I've had that hang up. It's just helping ease what holds you back. Is this okay? Is that not okay? It's that part of your brain will still be there, but just kind of let it be in the passenger seat. And it can comment and be a backseat driver, but your head, your heart, and your hands, that's now in control.
I think one thing we can all agree on is that artists have courage because you're putting out part of your soul and inviting everybody in the world to be a critic. That takes courage. Courage or stupidity. Courage. And I thank you all for having the courage to